And good morning to the viewers.
Now tell us about this theme, Understanding Africa to Celebrate Africa Day.
The challenge about Africa Day, we know why we celebrate it. It emanates from the fact that it is on a day on which the Organization of African Unity and the African Union were formed. And we become quite romantic about what it means, and forgetting that there are actually some implications on the day itself. First, you need to go back to the creation of the Organization of African Unity, which was focused first and foremost on the liberation of African people from colonialism. You had Pan-Africanists like Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Leopold Senghor, or Frantz Fanon, people who believed that African people should unite to free themselves from the colonial burden and to take charge of their own lives to become independent. And there is the sense that we still have of that as a main focus for us as Africans to want to unite as a people, but we have not been very good at doing so. So the focus is to say that we as Africans do need to celebrate our Africanness, but not only in a romantic sense, but to be realistic about what it is.
So what was the main purpose of the lecture? Is it your understanding that people don't really know about Africa Day?
I think we know what it is. It is not so much that we don't know. It is that we know it in the abstract. We don't realize that, again, from the beginning of the Organization of African Unity and now to the African Union, yes, we have this concept of us being Africans and belonging together as a people. But we say that, I think, in theory. But most of the time, if you're to ask, specifically, for instance, in South Africa, and I presume you might find the same experience elsewhere, but predominantly in South Africa, if you ask people to what extent do we actually see ourselves as Africans, by and large, if you ask the question, you will say yes. But in reality, we actually don't think of ourselves as Africans. Again, I don't think it's unique to South Africa, and I was trying to make the point that first and foremost, for us to actually celebrate the day and to celebrate the organization, we need to see ourselves deep down as Africans and not to aspire to be anybody else, because it is when we see ourselves as Africans do we then take charge and responsibility for being who we are and taking ourselves where we believe Africa needs to go. And if you think of it from the perspective of the day, it is that the continent must be united, the peoples of Africa must be united to free ourselves. And I think in the past from colonialism, I think now it is free ourselves sometimes from ourselves. Mm-hmm. The challenges that we face might have historical origins, but we've been very, very instrumental in entrenching some of the difficulties that we are experiencing on the continent, be it issues around, for instance, in the news clip that you heard just now, terrorism in Nigeria perpetrated by Boko Haram. But you have all kinds of challenges that the continent is facing in Central African Republic, in the South Sudan, in Mali. So as a continent, we're still under stress because of these political challenges at the governance level. Economically, the continent is still very, very, very disjointed. There is no single way that we as a continent are actually doing business with each other. I think we do business with a lot of other people, and we're not doing business with ourselves. So the appreciation that, yes, we want Pan-Africanism, but it's not a theory. It's got to be us wanting it to be what it is, and it'll take us to work to make it be so. Mm-hmm. But first and foremost is to know that we are part of it, and we must take ownership for it.
Now, during your talk at Stellenbosch, did you find that young people embrace their African roots and their Africanness?
Sadly, I think the question is probably complicated in a sense that if you ask me, do most South Africans embrace, I would say not as much. And the way I illustrated this point was to say we at Stellenbosch have business ties. We have exchanges with other African universities. And we give, for instance, our MBA students an opportunity to go and study in other universities within the continent. And the most amazing thing is that not a single student actually wants to take up that opportunity to go and spend maybe a few months in another university in Africa. There is no lack of takers, of people wanting to go to the US or takers wanting to go to the East. But ask people to go to Africa, and almost there's this kind of mental block that you can't really get a decent education or a decent exposure to culture, to whatever it is that you as a student will want, to business and how business is done. Nobody seems to think that you can get that out of Africa, but you can get it from somewhere else. Having said that, the experience, of course, is a little bit different from students coming from the rest of Africa. At the university, we do host a lot of students who come from other parts of the continent. So, and having said that, I think while people will come to South Africa, I think there's also in other parts of Africa the tendency to say, if I want a good education, if I want good exposure to business, I will get it from the US or I'll get it from Europe, and maybe now some people even thinking they get it from China. But there's no sense that you can get that from within the itself.
And why do you think that is? Is it because of lack of exposure?
I think it is partly a lack of exposure. Again, from a South African's perspective, is that my generation, more than any other one, I think we're in a sense kind of, unless of course you were in exile. If you are not in exile, Africa was kind of a very remote place, although of course we are in it. We didn't see ourselves as part of it. And I think that was encouraged to see ourselves as being slightly different from, I think, the rest of the continent. And that kind of sense of ourselves as not necessarily being part of the continent still continues. And we haven't done quite a lot to, number one, make ourselves appreciate that a lot of the lessons that I think we as a country in South Africa or any other country within the continent that we need to learn and kind of implement in making sure that we actually progress can be done by actually looking either at our neighbors, and our neighbors being our fellow countries within the continent, hasn't actually been the kind of thing that is encouraged, and it's not something that we pay attention to. So I do think that there is a need to make us aware of what it is that the continent has to offer. And that might just be a question of exposure, to simply know that there are countries out there, they're very, very different and actually very, very interesting, and that we can learn something from them. And either by going to visit or probably spending more time understanding what those countries are. Just to give an example, if I were to ask a lot of people what are the heads of state of most African countries, most people will struggle to name them unless they are the ones that I think are much more in the news. But if you ask them the same question about leaders, for instance, in Europe or the US, they will kind of tell you the names without having to think twice. So I think there is a need, and again, I'm speaking to a media agency for people to in a sense, make us aware more and more of Africa and its diversity, and how that diversity is an aspect that is very, very positive as opposed to being just negative.
Well, as a channel, I can tell you now that we're doing a lot to do that. In fact, to make people aware of the heads of states of Africa and, of course, the populations in Africa. But coming back to the question, how can people, young people especially, make the most of the continent's diversity and complexity with regards to business?
Well, I think first of all, before you go to business, first you need to know it. I mean, you need to know what it has to offer, and you might start, for instance, by actually, getting educated about it and educated in it. I think there is a sense of saying, well, Africa is only about us doing business. I think from a business point of view, that's not actually wrong, but unless you know what the opportunities are, you can't really do business. As you've indicated already, Africa is a very big, diverse place. There are 54, and some people might say 55 countries within Africa. They're not just 54. They're extremely different. I mean, they're different in terms of the kind of people that live there, the kind of language that people speak, the kind of food, music, art, and all kinds of aspects of culture that I think one will find in those different countries. They are different in terms of how they do business, given our colonial past. Some countries have a leaning towards English and the English, because they were part of the colonies that were under the United Kingdom. You find countries that have a history of association with France, with Portugal, with Belgium, all of them doing business very, very differently. And more important, all of them having different things that they can offer in terms of resources. So for instance, South Africa has been known for gold, for coal, for platinum. You might go to the DRC, you find things like copper, you find issues like the rare metals that are used in modern technology.
Yes.
You go to countries like Nigeria and Gabon and Guinea, and those countries have oil and they do very well in agriculture. You go to the tropics, each country has something that they can offer to its neighbors that is very, very unique to that particular country. But we haven't spent a lot of time exploring to understand what it is that they offer. And in a sense saying, well, if I want to then go and do business, what it is that I'm going to find in each country that will serve me as a business to trade in my country and to see if I can actually do the trading within the countries, within the continent. Because one of the biggest problems is that the business opportunities in each country does not necessarily extend beyond the borders of that country. And I think the intentions of the founders of the Organization of African Unity and the African Union to find economic integration still remains a pipe dream.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole, for your time. That was Abel Sithole. He is an academic from the University's Business School. They're talking from the University of Stellenbosch, Business School, talking to us from our Cape Town studios. Now, that's your international news.